The Greeks were never a people who were afraid to leave their homeland in order to find a living somewhere else. Already during the early days of the first millennium BCE, we see large groups of Greek people cross the Aegean Sea in order to found colonies on the coasts of Asia Minor in modern-day Turkey. They did not stop there. Later on during the Archaic period, they would found settlements all the way from the Iberian Peninsula to the coasts of the Black Sea. But none of this could be compared to the grand-scale colonization initiated by Alexander the Great in Asia during his conquests and continued by his successors, the Seleucid dynasty, who ruled over Asia after his death. At the end of the 4th century BCE and during the 3rd century BCE, various Hellenistic settlements with a large proportion of Greek Macedonian colonists would see the light of day. This video will take a look at the Greek Macedonian presence at the farthest frontier of the Hellenistic world, namely in the modern-day country of Tajikistan. There was discovered a settlement that was founded during the early Hellenistic period, so probably around 300 BCE or the early 3rd century BCE. So we are talking about a city that probably saw its origins during the period when the Seleucid family held power in this region. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce you to the archaeological site of Takht-i Sangin. It is called Takht-i Sangin because we cannot identify the city. We do not know its ancient name. Takht-i Sangin is Persian for a throne of stone. And this archaeological site is situated at the Amu Darya, which is the modern name for the famous ancient river of the Oxus, which was considered by many ancient Greeks as the outer frontier of the civilized world. So for the Greeks and the Macedonians who settled here, initially there must have been a sentiment of excitement but also of fear, because they were to live in a place which was considered by their fellow countrymen as the outer fringes of the known world. And so initially this city must have been part of the Seleucid Empire, situated at its northeastern border. But later on, around 250 BCE, Takht-i Sangin would become part of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. This was a breakaway Hellenistic empire which rebelled against the Seleucid monarchy under the leadership of the self-proclaimed king Diodotos. The Seleucids were at that time too busy in the west to reconquer this rebellious region. At the end of the 3rd century, however, Antiochus III, also known as Antiochus the Great, attempted to re-establish Seleucid authority there during his Great Eastern Campaign, the so-called Anabasis. The ruler of Bactria at that time was Euthydemus. Antiochus was partially successful in his war against the Greco-Bactrians, but wasn't able to capture their capital, Bactra. The Seleucids were forced to accept the independence of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, and so it would remain until the end of its days, half a century later. Between circa 175 and 145, the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, and thus Takht-i Sangin, was ruled by the powerful Eucratides, who overthrew the dynasty of the previously mentioned Euthydemus. He is known for his great wars against the Hellenistic rulers of the Indian subcontinent. After his death, however, the Greco-Bactrian kingdom quickly disintegrated due to the incessant attacks from the north by a people called the Yuezhi. They overran Bactria, and around that time also the city of Takht-i Sangin fell. The descendants of the Yuezhi later established the strong Kushan Empire during the early 1st century. Takht-i Sangin became inhabited again for some time before becoming a ghost town for the rest of history. Now that we have put this settlement in its historical context, let's take a look at Takht-i Sangin itself. I repeat, it was situated in the southwest of Tajikistan. More specifically, it lay between the river the Amu Darya to the east and the Tashiktosh mountain to the west. It was thus sandwiched, so to speak, between two natural defenses, while the other sides were protected by thick mud brick walls. The shape of the city was elongated, measuring 4.5 by 3 kilometers. So it wasn't a particularly big city. The archaeologists who excavated the settlement between 1976 and 1991 were Boris Litvinsky and Igor Pishikyan. They focused on the uncovering of its main sanctuary, situated on a 10-meter high raised platform measuring around 170 to 210 by 240 meters with a temple upon it. This was the sacred focal point of the city, if not the region in general. Its monumentality has given rise to the speculation that we are dealing here with a royally funded temple, so a building project commissioned by the Seleucid dynasty. Its connection to Hellenistic kinship is confirmed by the finding of two clay heads of monarchs wearing their typical crown, the diadem. The idea that the sanctuary is the result of royal intervention and consequently not a natural consequence of the wealth of the city is suggested furthermore by the small size of the settlement. It is simply too large, the temple, for such a modest town. The temple itself is the earliest known enclosed sacred space from Bactria and Iran. There were found several altars. Some of them were situated inside the temple, while others were outside the indoor area, as was custom in the Greek world. The excavators Litvinsky and Pishikyan have thought that we are dealing here with fire altars and that we are consequently looking at the oldest known Zoroastrian fire temple of the Persian world. However, this theory has been debated by Lindström when he showed that the ashes of the fire sacrifices that served as evidence for this theory were actually foundation deposits. Some archaeological elements of the temple clearly show Greek cultural influence, such as the Ionic capitals of the columns. Many votive offerings, some 8,000 to be exact, were uncovered at Takht-i Sangin, and some of these, such as the small statuettes, also reveal the Greek presence in the city. But as I have said multiple times, the town was Hellenistic, which is not synonymous with Greek. Greek influence was certainly dominant in some material domains, but there were also many other cultures present. Indian, Scythian, Achaemenid and Parthian artistic input can also be seen in the archaeological findings. In this multicultural environment, they morphed together into a single complex cultural idiom. In any case, let us get back to the temple itself we are discussing. Its name is a temple of the oxus because there are found many votive offerings to the god Oxus. So the personification of the Amu Darya river was honored here. According to some, the design of the temple suggests that actually two deities were worshipped here. Such a dual cult within the same sacred space is attested elsewhere in Hellenistic Bactria. In the so-called temple with the indented niches at Ai Khanum, some 100 kilometers to the east, we also encounter this phenomenon. The second god of the Oxus temple has not been identified, however. One famous object from the sanctuary is the dedication by Atrosokes. This dedication beautifully illustrates the complex intercultural society we are dealing here with. It is a man with a Persian name, Atrosokes, who sacrifices to a Bactrian god, Oxus, and the object itself is adorned with a small statuette which is artistically Greek. It is a nude satyr playing a double flute, a Greek instrument called the aulos. He has been identified with the very ancient Greek god Marsyas, who also functioned as a river deity of the ancient Marsyas River, a river in Greater Phrygia in Asia Minor, which flowed into the famous Meander River. Archaeologist and specialist in Hellenistic Bactria, Paul Bernard, has deduced from this that most of the settlers, the Greek settlers that is, of Takht-i Sangin came from the Meander Valley, and that they perceived some sort of similarity between the Marsyas River in their land of origin and the Oxus at their new home. So, riverine gods were central in the religious life of the inhabitants of Takht-i Sangin, and this might be reflected by some of the architectural elements in and around the temple. For example, there were wells, cisterns, and even a moat around the monument. They might have been filled with sacred water and thus had a religious function. It is interesting to note, however, that these elements at the same time could have had a defensive function. The moat, for example, halted the advance of attackers, and the wells and cisterns could have provided the population with water in case of a protracted siege. As previously discussed, there was also a great wall at the north and south side of the town, while the other sides were protected by the river and the mountains. In short, we can deduce from this that Takht-i Sangin was extremely important from a strategic point of view, and these defensive measures reflect a hostile climate around the city and the need to transform it into a stronghold. That there was much military activity here is also proven by the finding of many arms and armor, pointing to the presence of a strong garrison. I wish to end this video with a short discussion of some beautiful objects. Currently in the British Museum is the so-called Oxus treasure. These are some 180 pieces of metalwork crafted from gold and silver. They were dug up at the end of the 19th century, but the circumstances of their discovery remain unclear. Some speculate that they came from Takht-i Sangin. They are, however, from the Achaemenid period, so they predate the founding of the settlement discussed in this video. Close to Takht-i Sangin was an Achaemenid fortress called Takht-i Qabat. It is theorized, consequently, that these riches were transported to Takht-i Sangin during the Hellenistic period. Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week with another subject from along the Silk Road.